Chuck, hello. How are you doing?
I'm well. Good morning. Afternoon, maybe for you, but yeah, all is well.
Good stuff. Good stuff. You've been out on the lake last week in Michigan, haven't you?
As much
Fun.
as much as I possibly could.
Yeah, nice. I'm not jealous at all. It sounds nice. We haven't even got a sunny day here at the moment. I think it's forgotten summer, but maybe one day we'll get one. Anyway, today we're going to talk about HR and investigations that you do for management teams or for the HR department themselves. So, and this is an interesting area and one that I not encountered before. So, tell me, what kind of problems do you come across in dealing in this sort of area?
Right, right. So a lot of the problems that are brought to us from prospects and clients are really diverse, quite frankly, but they typically all boil down to an employee or group of employees that for which the management or leadership team have concerns, who may have not complied with policies, procedures, or guidelines, or may have, and the client or prospect are determining or are concerned their established policies and procedures or guidelines may be too broad and allowing behavior and actions and activities that really don't fit in line with their corporate goals.
So you sort of mean things like expenses, spending on expenses and on credit cards for the company or something like that, just as an example. And they've maybe spent a lot of money, and so the company's wondering, is this okay, or is this something that our policies had said wasn't right, or maybe our policies aren't dealing with this? Is that the kind of thing?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So they may be concerned that the employee or employees may have gone outside of policy, or that they're just astonished, they being the prospect or client, that some of the actions are actually within policy. It kind of works both
Yeah, no,
ways.
I can see that. So spending the £14,000 in a week on hotel bills and champagne, it wasn't actually
Right.
not. It was perfectly well permitted under the regulations for business
The
development.
the
That's
reins
good.
were a
Yeah,
bit the reins were a bit too loose.
yeah, I can see that. Right. So, what size businesses come to you? This must just be a small business thing, surely. Is that right?
No, honestly, we find it so it really is a mix, but more often than not, it's going to be fairly large entities, whether it be governmental entities or larger corporations. We've been engaged across the gamut of the size of entities, but it's not just a small business matter, and it's not just a large entity matter. In fact, I would argue it happens more in the larger organizations because there's so many things that folks are having to look at and evaluate. And we all want to trust our employees and our peers. And so unfortunately, that trust is broken at times, but relied on heavily that people are going to make the right decisions when no one's looking. Unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Yeah, so I guess in the smaller companies, you often have the case that there aren't policies and procedures in place. But I suppose in the bigger companies, they're there, but just don't actually cover everything that they need to cover, maybe. Would you say that's
Correct.
right?
In the smaller entities, there may not be the policies and procedures in place, but a lot of times, because it's smaller, there's fewer people and leadership are more integral in daily operations. And so they have eyes on what's going on. Where in your larger organizations, they may have policies and procedures, controls, if you will, in place that may be sufficient. They may not be sufficient, but the fact is, there's not often um, the correct individuals evaluating what's happening.
And
So
I
the
yeah.
eyes on the activities may not be as scrutinizing as they should be.
And I suppose in a bigger number of people, it's much harder to spot these things, isn't it? If things go under the radar a bit more, and it's sort of, and everything's siloed. So I guess if somebody's just doing the tick boxing over here and somebody's doing something
Right.
else over there, it slips between departments, doesn't it? And doesn't get spotted.
Oh, for sure. And it could be that it's just slightly, some of the activity may be just under the radar. So it's not too much of an outlier. to cause too much alarm or too many eyes to be focused on those outlier sort of activities. And so you nailed it. I mean, that's a part of some of the contributing factors as well.
So, what I sort of wondered thinking about this was why people bother to investigate these types of problems. I mean, if somebody in my business was messing about, I think I might be tempted once the trust is gone and you're sort of not feeling comfortable and your gut instinct saying there's something going wrong, I sort of move them out slowly but surely rather than spend the money on investigating. So, why do people choose to investigate it in your experience?
Yeah, valid point. Well, one, let's just be blunt. Their assumption, the client or prospect's assumption or hypothesis, may be wrong. There's a number of factors. They may believe someone or a group of employees are doing something outside of policy, but ultimately it could be that the policy is not really as defined as it should be. And the employee or employees are within policy. That could be one scenario. It could be a scenario where in fact the employee or employees are operating outside of HR policies or expense policies. But unless there's proof and something that a prospect or client can stand on, they could be susceptible for wrongful termination. You know, so it's really almost like a mitigation of future liability.
I suppose also if you don't investigate it and you did just get rid of somebody,
Mhm.
besides the sort of problems of sort of employment law, even if you manage to get around that, you're just going to have the same problem happen again, aren't you, if you're wrong and it's actually your policies that are the issue?
For sure, for sure. And it's a number of things. It's an assessment of what policies, procedures, controls, if you will, are on the books, but also you also get a bit of a gauge of the environment and the culture. Is it also an acceptable norm within an organization to disregard policies and procedures? That that is what a lot of times leadership doesn't have a good handle on, that the culture amongst their employees ultimately is a culture that policies and procedures don't matter, or their their policies and procedures are not updated to current business processes, and so they're perceived as irrelevant to how we do business. So there's a number of factors that really ultimately are assessed in an investigation like this.
And I guess that also means if somebody sees that somebody has been investigated and action is taken, is going to discourage others from doing something similar. Because when you do get those kind of cultural situations where, oh, he's taken from the stationery cupboard, so why can't I? And then the next person does it, and it becomes a normal thing. Everyone helps themselves to a whole bunch of sellotape and cards and sticky stuff at Christmas because it saves them going out and buying it, doesn't it? And if everyone's doing it, that becomes an endemic problem within the business, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It just tanks the culture. Well, he's doing it or she's doing it. Well, I can. And that's just that's a really bad situation, because then it's not an anomaly. It unfortunately can become a norm.
Yeah.
Because no one's watching over what you have, the fox watching over the hen house, right? Some version of that, or no fox, and the hen house is just kind of running amok.
Yeah. No, I can absolutely see that. So when you go to investigate, how do you go about it? You sort of turn up in your sleuth jacket and your big magnifying glass.
It's really a lot of collaboration with the prospect and client to gain a lot of intelligence from them with respect to their policies, procedures, controls, and talk them through what their expectations were, whether it be their personal and leadership expectations, but also the documented expectations. So that's a lot of dialogue and coordination with the prospect and client. And then continuing, once that standard has been established, it's a matter of, okay, what information have you retained within your organization that will either support or refute your concern or your hypothesis, and then where is that information, how we can obtain it. So we really try to be very strategic in that process to become efficient in collecting the appropriate information and then sorting through what's there.
Right. And so all the way through, you're actually talking to the client about what you're finding out, or do you sort of get that initial input from the client, then go away, do the work, and then come back at the end when you have an answer?
It's a little bit of both. So we really try to communicate with the client and work through throughout the process. So we're gonna develop questions as we go through the process. And hey, we've identified this. Do you have a policy regarding this topic? So that it's a continuous collaboration, and depending on the sensitivity of the topic, or maybe even the position of the employee or employees who are of concern, there's sometimes more sensitive matters that we stay further in the background, and sometimes the client wants us to be very overt about what we're doing, and so sometimes we conduct numerous interviews. So once interviews are conducted with current or former employees, if they will talk to us, the cat's out of the bag per se. It's pretty well known that folks are looking around and snooping.
Sometimes I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I agree with you actually.
Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes it just keeps people sensible and keeps their heads straight.
I would say it's two pronged, maybe more than that, but it it lets people know that leadership is looking out for things, but it also lets those employees who may not have been doing anything wrong and who may have been upset that others were,
Absolutely,
it lets
yes.
them know
Mhm.
that, hey, leadership is doing something about it. They're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really excellent point because I've been in workplaces when I was very much younger where there were things that were distinctly unfair,
Hmm,
it's very dispiriting for people who are totally
correct.
honest to sit
That's
around and
exactly right.
nothing being done about it. So
Yeah.
that's an excellent point. So when you so you say you, sometimes you're overt and sometimes you're very much in the background. Do you have an obligation under privacy law to actually tell the person that you're investigating that you are looking into them, or is it fine just to go in and get on with the job?
For this type of work, especially if we're not looking at um, PII, I mean, right, the scenarios we've discussed so far are really policy procedures, and all those activities and information are not going to be required for any sort of disclosure to that employee.
Right. So that place makes it a lot easier because then you're not giving the game away and they can't go and cover up or start destroying papers left, right,
Right. And I
and
mean,
centre.
those
Yeah.
typically those activities are somehow housed and retained in numerous sets of information. So it's very difficult for all the evidence, but or potential evidence to just disappear. Some items may, if they catch wind of an investigation and want to try and cover some tracks, but typically there's a few different deposit repositories of information.
Yeah, I think that's the advantage now with digital, isn't it? In a way that
For sure.
even 10 to 15 years ago, there was still too much paper knocking around, so things could
Right.
be got rid of. But, so when you've got your answer and I presume you put an evidence pack together or something like that in a report, is that right?
Correct. So our reports, because of most of my staff's law enforcement background, they more often than not read and tell a story that's obviously based on facts and evidence and information from the client, but it reads like a story. And ultimately, that product is the client's work product. And so that is what is ultimately the deliverable in any sort of consultation with the prospect and client as well. But ultimately, it is a documented report. Correct.
Yeah, so you hand that over, and then what happens then? Do you walk away, and leave the business to deal with it, or what's the next stage then to sort of see through on that report?
Ultimately, it's really the client's choice but we've been asked to help them because, again, our really deliverable and what we can do with the deliverable is turn it over to the client and then offer, okay, hey, if you want further assistance, whether it be refining policies, procedures, controls, whether it be facilitating contact with local law enforcement and helping them present this to law enforcement and or prosecutor's office. We certainly have been engaged to do that, but that is purely up to the client. So there's a variety of things that can happen, but we really are at the they're at the helm, if you will. They have control of that work product.
So really, you provide the evidence, and the client decides how it's used, where it's used. They have
Correct.
complete control over the way the investigation is done and the way that the final report is used.
Well, they have complete control over the final product we deliver them. That the investigation, we come in as a third party, unbiased
Right.
observer, for lack of terms, and so we counsel them and let them know our approach and work together, so they're very informed as to how what we're doing, why we're doing things, and how we're doing things. And ultimately, the facts are what they are. But the product that is delivered to the client, they have complete control as to what they do with that product, if you will.
But you maintain your independence as investigators
Absolutely.
and make
That's
sure it's
that's
absolutely
key,
accurate.
key for us.
So if it was then going to be used in court, say, because something was quite serious, it would be a document that would be possible to use in court because it's of a good standard.
Correct. That's exactly right.
And do you go to court and give evidence as well in those situations? Is that something you would
We
do?
have we have at times, or just fundamentally point law enforcement in the right direction. That's happened as well. So we are at times called for testimony, and at times it's just used as a stepping stone for law enforcement to further their investigation or initiate an investigation if it gets to the point of a criminal matter.
Yes. So if somebody's listening today and they've got a problem at work, what would your advice be for them to do first? What would be the first steps for them?
Well, the principal steps is to um, understand their own policies and procedures, you know, and evaluate why they think there's a concern. Has this been occurring? Really take an internal assessment and really keep it kind of close to the vest until either it's determined that there's an issue or that they want to seek some outside help in vetting out the problems.
Yeah, and obviously if they seek outside help, they're going to get an objectivity that they might not have internally.
Correct, correct. They may have some internal bias, not intentional, but that's their world they live in every day, right? So they may be a bit barn blind. I use that term often, barn blind to either good or bad, or problems or not problems. But there's an internal bias that happens, not intentional, but it just happens from being in the same place, looking at the same items, around the same people. It's just natural.
Isn't that just insanity?
Well, we've all
20 years in the
experienced it, I'm
same job,
sure.
yeah.
Right.
Anyway, oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that chat. That's really interesting, and I'm sure
Good.
there'll be others out there who'll be really interested in that too, because it's not something that gets talked about very often. So, no, very interesting topic. So, if somebody wants to talk to you about it, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, yeah. Easy is through LinkedIn or chuck.story@raymond.com. Reach out anytime, and I'm happy to help counsel you through something that may or may not, quite frankly, result in engagement for us. But goodwill is part of my job too.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks a lot, Chat, and see you again soon.
Thank you. Have a great day.